Thank you for joining me tonight for Bungalow in a Box, Kit Houses of the Early 20th Century. Let's start with a question. What is it about kit houses that makes them so interesting, not only to scholars of the built environment and architectural historians, but to the general public as well? Even today, in our modern 21st century world, there's something kind of magical about the concept of ordering a house from a catalog and having all the parts delivered in a boxcar, ready to be assembled into a new home. But this was not simply a concept. It was a real endeavor undertaken by both small regional firms and large national corporations in the early decades of the 20th century. Today's popularity and interest in kit houses stands in stark contrast to the actual number of kit houses that were manufactured and built. For it's estimated that kit houses account for less than 0.03% of the total number of housing units built between 1900 and 1930. Possibly 400,000 total were built, and the most well-known producer, Sears and Roebuck, only built an estimated 75,000 houses nationwide. Nonetheless, they continue to capture our attention today, and I'm looking forward to sharing their history with you this evening. To get us started, let's take a step back from the early 20th century to look at a few key events in the 19th century that paved the way for the development of kit houses. First off, in the 19th century, there's a major shift in how houses are constructed in the United States. And that is the transition from heavy timber framing to lightweight balloon framing. Developed in the 1830s in Chicago, balloon framing makes use of many lightweight, consistently sized wooden framing members joined with wire nails. This system eliminates the need for the skilled expertise of a timber framer, so that a small crew like the one shown here could assemble a house with relative ease and little skilled labor. Balloon framing also allowed for a greater variety of floor plans and building forms, and thus we see the great range of wood-framed house styles that appear in the mid-19th century, with any combination of towers, bay windows, porches, dormers, and decorative details. These were all easily executed when working with standard pieces of milled lumber. Balloon framing was superseded by platform framing, which utilized shorter lengths of wood and was the method of construction used for early 20th century kit houses. The key here is consistency of building materials, which is essential if you want to mass produce anything, including houses. The next important development was the creation of the portable house. In 1861, for example, the Boston firm of Skillings and Flint received a patent, shown here on the left, for what they called an improved portable house, and they published a catalog of their simple house kits in 1862. Skillings and Flint was a subsidiary of Lawrence Barnes and Company, which was a major lumber company based here in Burlington, Vermont. At this time, Burlington was the third largest lumber port in the nation after Chicago and Albany. Canadian timber was delivered to Burlington via Lake Champlain, where Barnes and Company would mill it into consistently sized pieces. The adjacent railroad lines enabled Barnes and Company to transport its lumber to Boston for fabrication into portable houses by Skillings and Flint. Then the house kits could be shipped literally anywhere in the world. Shown on the right is a view of the Burlington waterfront from the mid-19th century, showing the landscape filled with piles of lumber that are stacked between the railroad tracks in the foreground and Lake Champlain in the background. In 1862, the Burlington Free Press published a short article about the Lawrence Barnes operation and proclaimed that, quote, "The newest invention of the Yankee brain is a sectional portable house, furnished neatly, packed in boxes. In less time than it takes to tell it, a tree is put into a mill and sliced up into a dwelling house, a church, a barn, a railroad depot, or a military hospital, end quote. Now, the actual process was slightly more complicated, but you get the idea. In addition to producing physical buildings, companies like these were also laying the groundwork, psychologically, if you will, for the general public to embrace the concept that building components could be prepared in one place, shipped to another place for partial assembly, and then shipped out again to a different place for final construction. This stood in stark contrast to the traditional practice of a house being wholly built on site, from scratch, by a single builder and crew. Moving into the later 19th century, we start to see American cities changing in how they grow and develop. Populations are growing, and expanding streetcar networks are opening up new areas of land for development outside of the urban core. And these resulting suburban neighborhoods become home to what is known as the practical suburban house, a structure with modern conveniences such as indoor plumbing, central heating, electricity, all presented in a compact, well-designed, single-family home. Two of the most popular house types were the bungalow and the foursquare, both shown here, and both of which were also very popular kit house designs as well. Finally, the last piece of the puzzle was an act of Congress in 1893, when they passed legislation to establish a network of rural mail routes and mail carriers who delivered and picked up mail at personalized roadside mailboxes. Now, you might be wondering what on earth this new delivery network, known as Rural Free Delivery, has to do with kit houses. But think about it. Suddenly, companies had the means of delivering merchandise catalogs and goods directly into the mailbox of anyone, anywhere in the country. By 1908, for example, 1/5 of all Americans received the Sears and Roebuck catalog at home. The mail order era had arrived. And once consumers were accustomed to purchasing everything from clothing and medical supplies to lighting fixtures and fireplace mantles from a mail order catalog, it was not that great a leap to start offering a complete kit of parts to build a house. So our topic today is kit houses, and I want to go over a little bit of terminology. Think of a kit house like a Lego kit, a box of parts with an assembly manual for each piece, showing where it goes in the overall construction. Now, Legos come in a cardboard box, while kit houses came in a railroad boxcar. Everything was carefully packed and included in the shipment, as you can see on the right. From floor joists and siding to roof flashing, nails, and paint. Kit houses are not to be confused with panelized houses. Think of a gingerbread house that you might purchase at the store with directions on how to join the pre-made wall sections together to create the building. For example, the Hodgson House unit system utilized a series of 6-foot by 12-foot wall panels assembled in a factory, which could be combined in various configurations and then bolted together on site. Strictly speaking, this is not a kit house. Nor should kit houses be confused with prefabricated houses. A prefab house is like the dollhouse that you buy fully assembled at the store. Unpack it, set it up, and you're good to go. Or it's delivered on a truck and dropped into place, like this little building on the right. Finally, we have houses built from plans only, with all the materials and labor provided by the developer, builder, or homeowner. And once the builder had that set of plans, that house could be replicated over and over, leading some to mistakenly assume that they are kit houses because they look alike. This Prairie-style house in Burlington, for example, is not a kit house, but was built from plans purchased from the National Builder magazine in 1917 and built by a local contractor. There could be examples of this exact same house all over the country, but that doesn't mean that it's a kit house. So, to be clear, for the purpose of this talk, the term kit house refers to buildings that were advertised in and ordered from a catalog, manufactured at a central plant, delivered in unassembled pieces to the building site, and then constructed. Interestingly, due to the popular name brand recognition of Sears and Roebuck, the term Sears Kit House has really become a catch-all for any small early 20th century house that has the general characteristics of a bungalow or a foursquare. However, Sears was just one of several principal producers of kit houses, and not every kit house is a Sears kit house. These companies came into the field in slightly different ways at different times, and there's still some debate about who was the first. But we do know that Aladdin Homes of Bay City, Michigan, and Sears, Roebuck and Company of Chicago both published catalogs featuring complete house kits in 1908. Montgomery, Ward and Company followed suit in 1909 with their own catalog of house plans, as did the Chicago House Wrecking Company, later rebranded as Harris Brothers. In 1916, the Gordon Van Tyne Company entered the field of ready-cut homes. Let's use this catalog from 1916 to go through the process of selecting and ordering a new kit house. Now, the first step is the fun part. Looking through all the different designs, reading the descriptions, studying the floor plans, and pondering the glowing testimonials of previous customers that are printed on almost every single page of the catalog. Do you want the big, handsome bungalow? Or the practical four-room cottage? Or maybe the square house of striking design is more to your liking? The possibilities were really endless. In addition to the house plans and descriptions, the catalogs typically contain a few pages explaining the process of fabricating the houses. In this case, illustrated with a series of photos that show the lumber being cut, milled, and packed in the factory. And if we look closer, we can see that this shot on the right shows a central Vermont railroad car with all the parts for a Gordon Van Tyne house. Perhaps somewhere in Vermont, this house is still standing. A simple 2-page order form is all it took to start the process. Just fill in the blanks with the house model number, the materials that you need, and indicate how you're going to pay. You could send cash with the order, or you could have a bank guarantee your payment upon delivery of the goods. On page 2, specify your paint colors, your woodwork stains, and you're good to go. It was that simple. All of the building components for the house were manufactured and packed at a centralized facility and then shipped via rail to the nearest railroad station. Then you or your builder would load the pieces onto a truck, transport everything to the building site, and get to work putting the house up. This series of photos from a Sears catalog illustrates the typical construction process by which the house is built. As you can see, the actual construction of the house was not unlike a standard site-built home, the primary difference being that all the framing materials were ready cut to length. Many of the kit house companies emphasized how practical and efficient their products were. Gordon Van Tyne, for example, calculated that the construction of an average 5-bedroom house required 2,940 individual cuts with a hand saw by the builder on site. With a kit, however, all of those cuts could be made by machinery at the factory, so you didn't have to pay a builder to do that work on site. There's also very little waste, as we see in the catalog comparison of a kit house on the left and a house of standard construction on the right. The kit house job site is neat and tidy. The other house, built with the, quote, older hand saw method, has a messy building site and 2 truckloads of cut-off lumber scraps that will have to be hauled away. Now that we know a little bit about the origins and history of kit houses, let's talk about how to research and identify them. The first step is to educate yourself about the variety of kit houses that are out there and their specific characteristics. Fortunately, a lot of research has been done on this topic in recent years, and there are some excellent books available about the leading manufacturers of kit houses. Some are shown here, and there are many others. The book about Montgomery ward houses is especially useful because, in addition to information about wardway homes, it also includes brief summaries of many of the other kit house companies that were in operation at the time. And if you really want to dive into the history of pattern books and kit houses in a broad scope, going all the way back to the founding of the nation, then I highly recommend Richard Cheek's 2013 book, Selling the Dwelling, The Books That Built America's Houses, 1775 to 2000. There are also numerous websites and Facebook groups dedicated to kit houses, far too many to list here, but easily found online. One of the best resources for original copies of old kit house catalogs is the Building Technology Heritage Library, which is housed on the Internet Archive and maintained by the Association for Preservation Technology. This is the best source for free online access to dozens of kit house catalogs scanned in their entirety. Simply go to archive.org and search for Building Technology Heritage Library. Looking through these old catalogs also reveals that the companies were not only producing cute little bungalows and foursquares. Some of the designs were quite grand, as shown on the compilation of completed house projects in this 1911 Sears catalog page. They really wanted to show that these were not just simple little boxes, but could be quite elaborate. You'll also find that the companies were not limiting themselves to kit houses. There were entire catalogs devoted to farm buildings, including barns, chicken coops, silos, and parts for barns and stables. Most of the discussion about buildings built from kits is focused on houses, but agricultural buildings were equally important in rural parts of the country. Most of the companies also produced smaller, simpler buildings as well. This 1915 Aladdin catalog includes, in addition to houses, designs for garages and summer cottages. It even has a few pages devoted to furniture and fixtures, so you could order your house and furnish it too, all at once. Now, before heading out to find kit houses, it's useful to think about your community and identify the areas where you're likely to find them. Generally speaking, they'll show up in the neighborhoods that were developed in the late 19th, early 20th century, adjacent to older 19th century downtown core areas. For example, This is a map of Burlington in 1890, just about a decade before the start of kit house production, and it shows the development of the city at that time. Highlighted in yellow is the general developed core of the city. In blue on the left is Lake Champlain, and between the two is that area of the Burlington waterfront I referenced before, with the lumber yards and mills and railroads where some of the early portable houses were being produced. Now, looking at this, we can determine where development is likely. The southern portion of the city, an area of agricultural lands and large estates that were being subdivided and sold off, as well as on the east side of the city, beyond the University of Vermont, more agricultural land being developed, and at the northern side of downtown, also where there were tracts of land ripe for development. These areas are adjacent to the urban core, close enough to major roadways and trolley lines, but on previously undeveloped land. This is where you'll typically find neighborhoods of kit houses. And what to look for? Typically, houses like this, the practical suburban house. Most were probably built by contractors from plan sets, but some might be kit houses. Some of the features that are common to kit houses are shown here. Many feature distinctive brackets on the porch and roof eave, such as the 5-piece bracket shown here on the left on a Sears Winona house. And to illustrate that, we can highlight one of the brackets in the photo on the left with a horizontal member, a vertical member, 2 diagonals, and then a third or fifth shorter diagonal. That creates the 5-piece bracket. Likewise, the Pomona House from Aladdin has very distinctive horizontal brackets, shown here in a close-up detail. Another common feature of kit houses is the grouping of porch or entryway columns in sets of 2 or 3. The house on the left may be a Sears Crescent model. We haven't confirmed it. And note the 2 sets of 3 round columns supporting the projecting entry portico, and shown in a close-up at the bottom. In other cases, the columns may be oversized and heavily shaped, such as the ones on this possible Montgomery Ward house, which taper inward dramatically at the top. You can also look for small bump outs on the sides of kit houses, which were often included as an economical means of increasing floor space on the main level without building a larger foundation. You can see this feature clearly on this side elevation, where the bump out projects beyond the concrete block foundation wall. Gordon Van Tyne Ready Cut Home number 538, as shown in the 1916 catalog, includes a sizable bump out on the side elevation. Without this feature, the dining room would only measure 138 square feet. With the bump out, it measures 161 square feet, an increase of 23 square feet of floor space. This was a really important addition of space in an otherwise compact and efficient building footprint. So all of these features, the eave, brackets, columns, bump outs, and others, should be considered clues to identifying a kit house, but they're certainly not definitive indicators. There are kit house models that don't include any of these features. There are houses built by contractors that include all these features, but there are things to keep an eye out for that may help identify a kit house along with other information. Once you know where to look and what to look for, it's time to hit the streets and start exploring. Visual identification involves matching an existing house with similar houses in a catalog. But this is only the starting point and does not result in definitive documentation of a kit house. For example, on the left is a page from the 1919 Aladdin Homes catalog showing the Shadow Lawn model. And here's a house on Flynn Avenue in Burlington that looks suspiciously similar, as does this house on Charlotte Street. So, does this mean that we have two examples of Aladdin Shadow Lawn houses here in Burlington? Based on this information, the answer is a resounding maybe, because simply matching the rendering in a catalog to an extant house is not definitive proof that it's a kit house. Perhaps one of these was built from a kit, and then the builder used the same plan set to build another one using his own materials. Maybe neither one came from a kit, maybe both did. The only way to know for sure is to conduct a physical inspection of the building itself. Another way to identify kit houses is to conduct research using historical records and the catalogs themselves. For example, I mentioned earlier that all the catalogs made extensive use of customer testimonials. The 1953 Aladdin Homes catalog includes the Greystone model, which we see here on the left. It also includes two testimonials from owners who purchased and built the Greystone, and most importantly, it provides their hometown. RCW built one in Chester Depot, Vermont, and MAC built one in White River Junction, Vermont. Using the 1953 city directories for these communities, it may be possible to identify who RCW and MAC were and where they built these houses. Field verification would be the final step in the identification process. Some catalogs, in addition to testimonials, would list places where a specific model had been built, such as this page for the Maytown in the 1921 Sears catalog. With that distinctive tower, it only took a few minutes on Google Earth to search around Lyndonville, Vermont, which is listed as one of the places it was built, and find a house with a similar roofline. Going to the street view, I found this house on Raymond Street. You will note, however, that the catalog image and the as-built house are reversed. The tower is on the right in the catalog and on the left in the real thing. If we reverse the house photo, however, it's clear how closely they match up, but they're not exact replicas. The catalog drawing has two windows on the second-story facade, and the actual house only has one. So this, again, is not definitive proof either, but it's a good indication that this house in Lyndonville might be a Sears kit house. Another tactic is to search old newspapers for references to kit houses. However, if you search for kit house using an online newspaper service, you won't find much. This is really a more recent term, and in the early 20th century, they were more often referred to as ready-cut houses, meaning all the pieces had already been cut. For example, this notice in the Vermont Journal in June 1916 notes that a ready-cut house, the first of its kind, is being erected in Windsor, Vermont, on Hall's Terrace. Now, fortunately for us, Hall Street, as it is known today, only has 4 houses on it. And this one looks like it has all the right elements of a kit house. A simple form, clapboard on the first story, shingles on the second story, decorative treatments on the eaves, and so on. But is it a kit house? Only physical inspection can provide definitive proof. Sometimes you might get really lucky and find an article such as this one which identifies the owner, the street, and the manufacturer of the house. And here we have not one, but two, a Montgomery Ward house and a Sterling house. Sterling Homes was another manufacturer of kit houses, based in Bay City, Michigan. This again emphasizes that kit houses were being produced by many more companies than just the well-known Sears and Roebuck. City directory research should identify where Joseph Durkee and Leland Wood lived, and then a site visit to the property could help confirm whether or not a kit house exists. So, I've talked a lot about the need for physical inspection, and that's really the key indicator of whether or not a building is a kit house. So, how do you go about inspecting a potential kit house for clues as to its origin? There are several things to look for, and they vary according to manufacturer. Some are easier to spot than others, and some may be concealed by later alterations and interior improvements. One of the first things to look for is stamped framing members, which may be exposed in the attic or basement of the house. Sometimes they are revealed when a wall is opened up during renovations. In these examples from a Sears kit house, the lumber on the left is stamped on the side with an alphanumeric code, V29T, that corresponds to the set of building plans that came with the kit. In other cases, the alphanumeric code is stamped on the end of each board, which unfortunately means that the code is hidden once the board is put into place. Keep in mind also that the simple presence of a stamped code on a piece of wood does not necessarily mean it's a kit house. Lumber mills frequently stamp their wood to indicate when it was produced, where it came from, and so on. But keep an eye out for these codes and then try to match them up with known examples of kit houses. These images from Gordon Bantine catalogs show how their number was frequently stamped, which even sometimes included written labels, such as porch step stringer, we see on the left here, to aid in the identification of each specific piece. On the right is a diagram of how all the labeled pieces would be bundled together to correspond with their specific use and location on the building as it was being built. For example, if you're working on the roof dormer here, you know you need bundle number 1 for the framing of the roof, bundle number 6 for the wall sheathing, and bundle number 7 to frame in the window. They tried to make it as easy as possible. Sometimes the lumber is not stamped and instead has numbers written in grease pencil, as we can see here. Sometimes there's no marked lumber. Bottom line, if you can find stamped or marked lumber and can correlate the markings to a manufacturer, then there's a good chance that it's an authentic kit house. And the markings can be hard to find. They may be faded or worn off. You'll need a flashlight to prowl around your attic and basement, but take a good look and you might find something. Another clue to look for is paper labels that may remain attached to the back of trim inside the house. For example, these mailing labels were found on the back of pieces of trim during renovations. They don't say Sears and Roebuck anywhere on them, but the return address provides a clue. 925 Homan Avenue, Chicago, was the headquarters of Sears and Roebuck. Again, a word of caution. These labels simply indicate that the lumber came from Sears and Roebuck, but not necessarily that the entire house is a kit house. These trim pieces could have been purchased by the builder from Sears and Roebuck and used to finish up an otherwise standard built house. You can also look for physical components of the house, such as plumbing fixtures and hardware, that may provide clues about the origins of the design. For example, the hinges on this built-in bookcase are the same as those shown in the 1920 Sears Modern Home Catalog. But these again are clues, not definitive proof, since Sears also sold hardware like this separately in its catalogs and stores. Sometimes the name of the kit house manufacturer is actually incorporated into the hardware, such as this fantastic doorknob from an Aladdin house. Now, this is a pretty clear indication that it's an Aladdin kit house, because Aladdin did not sell its parts separately the way Sears and Montgomery Ward did. Now, if you're really lucky, the owner of the property may still have documentation related to the ordering and delivery of the house, such as order forms, shipping inventories, receipts, and so on. Blueprints and construction manuals may be present. Or my favorite, which we see on the right here, is the official certificate of deposit on building materials for a kit house. This one is from Sears and Roebuck and clearly says that it is for the Osborne model in 1928. This is about as definitive as you can get. And it also emphasizes the importance of not simply looking at whether or not a building matches a picture in a catalog, but looking at the building itself, talking to the owners, doing that deep research, and seeing what you can turn up. So in summary, hopefully you've gathered that positive identification of a verified kit house is actually really difficult to do. And it's usually achieved through a combination of visual comparison to known designs, archival and documentary research, and physical inspection. So that brings us to today and the question, what happened? Why aren't we still able to order houses by mail? Most of the major firms selling kit houses fell on hard times during the Great Depression, followed by the moratorium on new construction during World War II. Despite a slight increase in sales following the end of the war, by the mid-1970s, almost all of these firms had gone out of business or stopped marketing kit houses. Some ran into trouble with the financing packages that had been offered to homeowners to build their houses. Sears and Roebuck, for example, underwrote thousands of mortgages for their kit houses in the 1920s and was then faced with the unenviable task of foreclosing on their own customers and repossessing their homes in the 1930s when the homeowner couldn't make the mortgage payments. As I mentioned at the start, kit houses accounted for a minuscule fraction of the total number of housing units built in the early 20th century. So why are we still talking about them today, 100 years later? Yes, the houses that remain are nice buildings and fun to research and identify. But I would argue that the real importance of these early 20th century kit house programs lies not so much in the buildings themselves, but rather in the mail order catalog network, through which the ideals of what a middle-class, single-family American home could or should be was disseminated nationwide. These catalogs served a dual purpose of both reflecting existing ideas about housing and influencing new housing designs. They made different architectural styles accessible to anyone, anywhere in the country. For example, the Magnolia model from Sears was one of their grandest and most expensive models and based on Longfellow's home in Cambridge, Massachusetts. If this appealed to you and you didn't live in New England, you could order it and put a version up in North Carolina or Ohio, or wherever you lived. Or perhaps you're taken by the mission-style Alhambra from Sears, but you live in Burlington, Vermont. No problem. Even if you didn't order the actual kit house from Sears and Roebuck, the catalog images and floor plans were often enough for a homeowner to communicate to a builder what they wanted. So, Is the house shown here an actual example of a Sears Alhambra kit house? Probably not. There are several notable differences in the designs, but there are also a lot of similarities. And with the mission style not being of wide renown in Vermont, there's a good chance that this Burlington house was at least influenced by the Sears catalog depictions of the Alhambra, even if it's not an actual example of the Alhambra kit house. So while the actual number of kit houses built was nominal, the influence of the kit house catalogs was enormous and guided the development of communities across the country. And that, to me, is the real value of studying kit houses today. And the built examples that we can positively identify in the field are physical reminders of this important period in American architectural history. Now, I know you're all itching to get out there and start finding kit houses, and I wish you the best of luck. If you're in Vermont, let me know what you find. I'd love to add to our inventory. Thank you for your time and happy house hunting.